If you believe quiet strength deserves recognition, if you believe every act of service matters, even the ones nobody applauds, make sure to like and subscribe. Because some stories aren't told in headlines, but in the silence between orders, in the quiet way a leader stands when no one's watching. It began like any other morning at Camp Valor, a sprawling military training base hidden deep within the woods of rural Virginia, where the horizon stretched endlessly, dotted by endless rows of barracks and training grounds that smelled of sweat, metal, and something more primal, a legacy of duty. Corporal Maya Reynolds, 28 years old, had been quietly assigned the task that everyone else called babysitting the new recruits. It wasn't a role she asked for, nor one she celebrated. In fact, most of the staff treated her like she didn't matter. She wasn't the kind of Marine they spotlighted in morning briefings or featured in motivational posters. Her name wasn't whispered with admiration. Her presence was, at best, tolerated, a necessary fixture but never central to the story. Her uniform was flawless, yet unadorned. No shiny medals glimmered on her chest. No special insignias marked her as someone extraordinary. Just a standard-issue corporal's patch and the quiet weight of experience no one seemed interested in acknowledging. The new recruits eyed her with a mixture of suspicion, boredom, and thinly veiled contempt. She was young enough to be one of them, but they knew better. Something about Maya's gaze, the way it held steady, unyielding, as if time and experience had carved precision into her posture, made them uncomfortable. She didn't shout. She didn't over-explain. She didn't even smile. She simply moved. Each morning, Maya arrived at exactly 0500 hours, when the base still wore its silence like a shroud. The sky was always a slate gray, clouds lingering like silent witnesses. She would walk the perimeter of the barracks before sunrise, her boots pressing into cold dirt, every step methodical, every breath measured. She didn't make a show of it. No one watched, and she never sought an audience. The new recruits fumbled through their drills, misstepped, called out the wrong orders, lost composure. Maya corrected them with quiet precision, never harsh, never condescending, but with a knowledge that demanded attention without demanding respect. She was neither a hero nor a cautionary tale. She was simply there, day after day, invisible, except to those who learned to pay attention. The whispers started early. Lieutenant Jensen, a rising star known more for his loud bravado than actual competence, once remarked within earshot of his peers, "Reynolds, all she's good for is filing reports and reminding us to keep our boots polished." The other officers chuckled, a chorus of superiority masking their insecurity. Recruits followed suit, mimicking her measured pace, snickering about how the babysitter couldn't lead a patrol through a paperclip factory. What they didn't see, or refused to see, was the way her eyes scanned every inch of the training grounds as though reading invisible lines in the dirt. How her hands, calloused but steady, inspected every buckle, every clasp, every piece of faulty gear without missing a beat. How she could recite protocols backward and forward, not from pride, but from necessity, from experience written in scars, both visible and hidden. No one asked where she came from. No one asked why, at 28, she wasn't already a sergeant. No one asked about the thin scar trailing from her temple to her jawline or the steady limp in her left leg, subtle enough that only the most observant would notice. She never offered explanations. It wasn't pride or bitterness. It was discipline, a quiet promise to herself that no weakness would ever betray her, not again. Maya Reynolds hadn't always been relegated to support duty. She'd been a combat scout, one of the youngest to ever earn such a role. Her deployments in conflict zones remained classified, orders stamped top secret, far from the public eye. 3 tours overseas, a dozen combat missions, several medals tucked away in a shadow box at her apartment, sealed and untouched since the last one was awarded. A letter lay within, signed by a general whose name carried weight far beyond anyone here dared to mention. But it wasn't until the day the commandant of Camp Valor arrived unannounced that something shifted, a moment neither Maya nor the recruits knew was coming, and yet had been quietly building for years. The sun barely peeked over the horizon when a sleek black SUV rolled onto the gravel drive, dust rising in a small cloud behind it. The commanding presence of General Hayes, a 4-star officer with decades of experience and a reputation for spotting untapped potential, cast a long shadow across the compound. His eyes swept over the recruits, officers, and staff as if scanning for weakness, for error, for truth buried beneath layers of indifference. His gaze landed on Maya. She was kneeling beside a recruit who had lost his footing during morning exercises, adjusting his stance without a word of rebuke. The recruit, flustered but not ashamed, followed her instructions without hesitation. To the others, it looked ordinary, a corporal doing her job. But to General Hayes, it was something far more remarkable. Without warning, he strode toward them, his boots thudding like a silent announcement. The murmur of the base faltered. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Eyes darted away, uncomfortable, uncertain. "Corporal Reynolds," General Hayes said, his voice firm but not unkind. "Explain your role here." Her head lifted slowly. Her voice was steady, calm. "I train them," she said simply. "I correct their mistakes. I prepare them for what comes next." The general's eyes narrowed slightly. "Why haven't you been leading them?" The question hung in the air, weightier than any drill command. "Because I was told to babysit," Maya answered without irony or challenge. Her words were matter of fact, almost like reading a report, but the gravity beneath them cut deeper than any confrontation. The general studied her for a long moment, the silence stretching, thick and deliberate. Then, without another word, he turned away, signaling his aides. That afternoon, the base began to shift, not because of a press release, not because of a formal ceremony, but because someone finally opened that sealed shadow box. Inside were medals no one at Camp Valor had ever seen, certifications written in languages too technical for most to comprehend, and a letter signed by a general whose name few dared to utter aloud. A letter that simply said, "For unwavering dedication and leadership when no one else would recognize it." The message wasn't loud. It wasn't broadcast over the intercom. It was left quietly on Maya's desk, folded neatly beside her clipboard. No one knew what would come next, but everyone who had laughed, sneered, or dismissed her would now carry a subtle understanding. A slow, undeniable shift in the way silence speaks louder than noise. Because sometimes, the strongest leaders don't demand to be seen. They simply stand steady, and when the time comes, they're chosen. And in the quiet corners of Camp Valor, a legacy began. They said she was nobody, just a corporal, too soft, too quiet for command. But the day the commandant made his choice, the ground began to shift beneath Camp Valor, silent but inevitable, like a storm gathering strength. The following morning, word had already begun to spread, whispers traveling faster than official memos. Corporal Maya Reynolds was now officially assigned as platoon leader. The announcement wasn't made with fanfare, no ceremony, no standing ovation. Just a terse memo, slipped under the doors of the barracks and training offices, signed by General Hayes himself. By mid-morning, Maya stood in front of her newly assigned platoon for the first time. The recruits, once dismissive, once mocking, now uncertain. Their eyes flickered from the memo in their hands to her face, searching for the mistake they expected to find. What they saw instead was a woman standing taller than her rank, not because of uniform insignia, but because of a presence that didn't waver. Her voice, when she spoke, was steady but commanding, carrying the quiet authority of someone who didn't need to shout to be heard. "We begin today not because you're ready," Maya said, her tone measured, "but because you must be." She didn't smile. She didn't offer false encouragement. She offered expectations, high and immovable. The training ground was no longer a place of fumbling mistakes, but a proving ground under her watch. Recruits stumbled at first, off by a fraction, disorganized, lacking confidence. But Maya corrected them with a precision that felt surgical. No sarcasm, no belittling. Just corrections delivered in crisp sentences. "Reposition your left foot. Your rifle should not wobble. Eyes forward." At first, they resisted. Recruits flinched when called out, some holding back smirks, convinced she would falter under the weight of leadership. They weren't wrong to doubt. After all, who was she to lead? But week by week, something began to crack in their skepticism. Her methods were unyielding yet fair. She held them accountable, but never publicly shamed. When a recruit's voice broke under the pressure of shouted commands, Maya lowered her tone, guiding him back with the same quiet patience she used to fix a misaligned weapon sight. Her discipline didn't scream. It didn't threaten. It whispered, steady and unavoidable. One afternoon, During a grueling endurance run through the muddy trails surrounding Camp Valor, a young recruit collapsed under exhaustion, gasping, unable to move forward. The others slowed, uncertain. Maya didn't hesitate. She stepped forward, helping him to his feet without complaint or show of superiority. "We finished together," she said simply, and began walking him forward at the same deliberate pace she always carried. Steady, uncompromising, full of expectation. The recruits followed. Then came the pivotal exercise, an ambush simulation designed to test not just combat readiness but cohesion, leadership, and adaptability. The plan was simple on paper but brutal in execution. Simulated enemy forces would attack, without warning, forcing the platoon to respond under realistic stress. At 1,400 hours, the simulation began. Explosions echoed from the distance. Dirt kicked into the air as pyrotechnic charges detonated. Recruits scattered, some faltered. Panic threatened to take hold. Maya didn't shout orders. She stood perfectly still for a moment, absorbing the chaos. Then, with measured authority, she spoke. "Form defensive perimeter. Cover left flank." No hesitation. Her words weren't loud, but they cut through the noise like a scalpel, precise and exact. One by one, the recruits responded, snapping to attention, repositioning under her gaze. Their movements became fluid, almost instinctual, no longer clumsy, no longer uncertain. The simulation ended with every objective met, every protocol executed flawlessly. Later, in the debrief room, the recruits, once indifferent, now visibly changed, stood at attention. Their faces no longer reflected mockery or doubt, but something new: respect. Not for medals, not for rank, but for competence. General Hayes himself appeared unexpectedly during the debrief. His presence, as always, commanded attention without effort. He approached Maya with no announcement, no flourish, only a nod. "Corporal Reynolds," he said, his voice deliberate. "You led them through that exercise as if you'd been born to do it. I expect nothing less moving forward." Maya didn't smile. She simply nodded back. "I'm ready," she said, steady. The general's eyes lingered on her a moment longer, and then he turned, walking away without fanfare, leaving the weight of his words behind. From that day forward, the atmosphere at Camp Valor subtly but unmistakably shifted. Recruits began to look up to her, not because of rank, not because of medals pinned somewhere out of sight, but because she earned their attention daily, without asking for it. Whispers of platoon leader Reynolds began to spread through the barracks, carried in hushed tones and sidelong glances. Some still doubted, some still joked, but each doubt chipped away, replaced by the undeniable truth. Leadership didn't need to shout. It only needed to show, and Maya Reynolds showed. Every single day, weeks turned into months, and under Corporal Maya Reynolds' quiet but firm leadership, the platoon transformed. The once junior recruits, nervous, fumbling, unsure, became disciplined, precise, cohesive. Every morning began earlier, every drill was sharper, and every mistake corrected without humiliation, only silent insistence that they do better. Maya didn't seek praise. She didn't crave acknowledgement. Her legacy wasn't built on speeches or medals. It was built on trust earned in the trenches of routine and the patience of consistent expectation. Then came the day that tested them all. It was supposed to be another simulated exercise, a final evaluation before the recruits graduated into full Marine service. The scenario was simple on paper: an unexpected enemy engagement, requiring split-second decisions, coordinated movements, and individual accountability under pressure. The base command had no reason to expect it to go differently than any other drill. But this time, something changed. The first explosion was too close, too real. The sounds of gunfire echoed not from speakers, but from live fire in a nearby range. An unexpected miscommunication. The recruits froze. Instinct fought reason. Panic threatened to swallow them whole. In that moment, every eye instinctively turned toward Maya. She stood still for one heartbeat. Then, as though time slowed to match the precision of her training, she stepped forward. "Fall in," she commanded, her voice unwavering. Her tone was neither harsh nor pleading. It was inevitability, clear and direct. "Cover the left flank. Thompson, secure the rear. Martinez, formation Delta now." Her words were not shouted. They didn't need to be. They carried the weight of certainty, and it was enough. One by one, the recruits responded. Each movement became a piece of a larger, invisible machine. Precise, fluid, connected. Maya led them through the chaos as though she had been built for it. Every decision was deliberate, every command exact. Her presence didn't just organize the platoon, it galvanized them. By the time the enemy forces were neutralized, the exercise was no longer a test. It had become a demonstration. When the smoke cleared, General Hayes returned, this time not unannounced, but with deliberate purpose. His eyes scanned the field, taking in the disciplined formation, the recruits standing at attention, their faces marked by resolve instead of uncertainty. Without hesitation, he approached Maya. "Platoon Leader Reynolds," he said, his voice sharp but tinged with something like pride. "You did not just lead them today. You saved them. You made them Marines." For the first time, Maya allowed a small, almost imperceptible smile to break across her face, not out of pride, but quiet acknowledgement of a duty fulfilled. That evening, in the small privacy of her office, Maya sat at her desk. The soft glow of a single lamp illuminated the shadow box on the wall, a carefully preserved collection of medals, the letter signed by the general years ago, and a photo of a younger Maya standing with her team during an overseas deployment. She reached for the letter, running her fingers across the embossed signature. For unwavering dedication and leadership when no one else would recognize it. Her eyes glistened, not from the desire for recognition, but from understanding the deeper truth, that leadership wasn't about glory. It wasn't about applause. It was about standing firm when no one believed you could. The next morning, as dawn broke over Camp Valor, the recruits no longer saw Corporal Maya Reynolds as just the babysitter. They saw her as a leader who led when everyone else stepped back. The ones who had mocked her began to salute, not out of obligation, but out of respect. General Hayes watched from the sidelines as the platoon assembled for their morning formation. His gaze lingered on Maya for a long moment, then shifted to the recruits standing taller than the day before. Her legacy, once invisible, was now unmistakable. A few months later, a small plaque was quietly installed near the main gate of Camp Valor. Platoon Leader Maya Reynolds, for unseen valor, steadfast leadership, and quiet dedication. No ceremony, no speeches, just this simple engraving of truth. Because real leadership doesn't seek attention. It doesn't demand recognition. It stands when no one else can. Years from now, new recruits arriving at Camp Valor would hear her story, not in grand presentations, not in patriotic songs, but in quiet recounting by those who saw her lead without a word of fanfare. They would walk the training grounds in silence, just like she did. And when asked about Platoon Leader Reynolds, they wouldn't say she was loud, flashy, or commanding. They would say, "She led us when no one else believed we could follow."